Hey guys, a bit of a rough and ready one today as I'm doing a how to build video for one of my kits. I realise this is not going to be general consumption information, but people may want to see what these giant kits look like and how they go together, because it's by far the biggest model I make at 80 parts and quite a lot of building involved. So I'm going to look at the different stages and walk through it to see how we put these huge beasts together. Right, so these are the kits as they are completed. I'm going to actually break them down into looking at how to do the base build for the models in general, and then we'll look at how to do the individual weapon types and how they go together, and a few tips and tricks and some pitfalls that I fell into myself so that you don't have to. So let's get to it and take a look underneath the first part, which is going to be the main body. Right, so we're going to start by looking at how to put these kits together, and I'm going to use this one as an example because they all follow the same structure for how to build the base layers. It's only once you get to the top bits here and one or two individual details like this that you need to vary them, so we'll do those as we go along. It has two giant track pieces that tow it along. The build guide, according to the model on the website that I would have linked to, shows that you put these at the back and these ones with the ordinatum marking at the front. However, you could always swap these around, and it's no right or wrong if you want to do it that way. The parts are completely interchangeable in how they build underneath. So the parts go together by having each of these individual base pieces has a little tab on the top, and these base plates that you get have these little slots. So what I did when I built mine was I dry fitted and then assembled one layer at a time. So I built the entire base layer, then I put on this next layer, or this layer, sorry, here, then I put on this top layer over here, then I did the detailing parts for the various kits. So what I did was I started by not gluing the pieces to each other, but gluing everything to one of these base plates. So I took this base plate and assembled it with the two wheel or tracked sections at the side, and you're just using super glue. You could use epoxy glue, but there really is no need to go through all that. This is not as heavy as a giant resin kit from something like Forge World. These are much lighter because these parts are mostly hollow. And then once the wheels were glued down and had a chance for the glue to dry slightly, I then glued on the back piece and the front piece, and then once that was all set up, I could put the two base plates together with a little bit of glue in between, and then use these two pieces to line them all up. And then I pushed it flat on my tabletop and left that glue to set for about 15 minutes so that it's got a nice bond, and that gives you a nice flat surface to start the next layer on. So then what I did was I went round and glued on the individual parts, because these are individual corner pieces and a straight piece. And you'll notice that some of the straight pieces have detailing like this, and that's to go here where you can't get any additional elements on. And you'll notice that some of them, in fact most of them, have a recess that these little different components all plug into. So you'll see that the plugged in parts have a magnet recess, which you can put a 5x1 magnet in if you want to have it magnetized. I just glued mine in because it was easy, but if you wanted to be able to swap things around, you could totally do that. When you're doing this layer, note that if you're building the one with the giant macro shells, you're going to want to put these loaders on the back. They're integral to this part of the model here. And you can put them in any order. I put them in this order because it made sense that they were loading in a new shell. This one had been transferred up into the gun carriage and then loaded up, ready to fire, be pushed into the breech. So that's the second layer, and glued each piece not to each other but down to the base plate, so there's a little bit of play. There's some slight tolerances, but these overlapping joints here mean that you don't ever see gaps through into the model, which is really smart work by the designer. Then once that whole layer is glued down, you can then put a glue dot on top of each of the nodules that's revealed on top of these, and then these base plates sit on top. So it's almost like a Lego really, where you have the little bump and then a recess, and that's how we're building it up. And then we do the last one over here, and this is just a straight round one again, making sure that where you can't get into the model here, you're using the plate that has full detailing on it. And then will be complete all the way around. Now I then glued these pieces on afterwards so I could consider each layer completed. And then looking at this piece as the macro shells, what you can do is you put these little turntable plates on, and I've put the magnets in here because on the bottom of the gun mount, this is the same for the sonic radar, are the recesses for the magnets as well, so that it holds on, but is also positionable at 45-degree increments like that. It just means it stays together nicely during game time, but then you can take it apart and store it in a box a lot simpler. So once you've got all of those parts on, and then this little ring of defensive walls, you've got this piece detailed at the back that goes over the top like this one does. You've got this little command bridge that both fits on top of these little Lego-like nubs, and then a piece goes into the recess on this side, which is where any of these elements would normally go. And then once you've finished doing those main parts, I then went and put the individual cannons on. Now again, these are also magnetized on the inside if you want. I don't know what the diameter, I think it's a 3x1 magnet that goes into these. So you could have them so they come off, which in hindsight I should have done, because in the box these kind of knock up against each other. So I have to put a bit of foam in between. Having them magnetized, which would just reduce any breakages. And the last thing to go on then is the radar. Next up is assembling whatever weapon goes on top. So again, in this case, it's the macro cannon. The barrel parts all fit together really easily. It's very obvious which way they go. Again, I use the reference images to show that this vent piece here lines up with the middle of these three pistons, whatever they're supposed to be, which then lines up with all the other detailing all the way down. Don't do what I did and glue on the actual barrel chamber. Don't know what the technical, can't remember what the technical part for this is. It should be the other way up so that it opens up, and so that this is facing the same way as these, which should have been a cue for me, but I was probably too tired when I was doing this. And then you've got to put these little plasma coils in here. The kit has more of these plasma coils than you need, just in case you lose one or two, because they are the smallest part on the kit by quite a margin. And then when putting this on, I built the whole gun barrel first, and then had this cleaned up and these two little support pieces ready to go, so that I could put glue in the two joints here. I could then put the two piston assemblies in, put the gun on top, because there's a part in here where the this holds on to the center mount, is a big chunk that's part of this piece. So I put glue in the joint there and glue in the joints here, and then put it all together and got it into a position where the gun's pointing forwards. There's a little play, so you could have it maybe a few degrees up or a few degrees down. Down doesn't really make sense for such a large weapon. Up would make more sense, but I just went for something nice and level. And then that piece is done, and again, you can magnetize it if you want, and it fits on there. Now the reason why you've got to be careful with the alignment is it doesn't look too bad having the chamber the wrong way up. It just means it doesn't sit perfectly there. There's like 1mm where it just clips this. Again, not a problem, especially if I'm going to display it or play with it like this. But it's definitely one to watch out for, and not make that mistake, sorry. Right, now moving on to the sonic weapon, you can see that I personally arranged these in slightly different locations. You can keep them as you like. There is a piece at the back and you end up with one of these plates at the back, or I think there's also a spare open part that you can put in there with a little vent on it. I put mine on the front here, which is okay. Was a bit tricky to build. I definitely should have put it on the back, would have been a more sensible place for it to be, but the point is they're kind of interchangeable and they don't look bad wherever you put them, they're just different. This one has the coils on top of this, followed by these two supporting doorways with their ladders, and then this piece goes on top. Again, then one of those mounting plates that lets you put the multi-directional magnet arrangement. The front piece has this little command bridge area with the radar on top, and again, the guns and the side mounts are all in the same, and again, you'll see that this is the exact same main chassis construction as you saw before. Again, with this weapon, I would build the sonic part together in this arrangement, again looking at the reference image. These little cables go from under here onto here. Make sure you get the right way round, because there is a left one and a right one. You'll know because they only fit one way, but as with any resin kit, dry fit everything before you apply super glue, because once those parts have been together for a couple of minutes, undoing any errors becomes incredibly difficult or impossible. And then once that was finished, I then put the glue in the two joints here and here and here, and then this one in the middle, and then put the two pistons and the gun together again, making sure it was nice and level, and the little slight play in it meant that everything was pointed the way you want it. Again, you could angle it upwards slightly. And then this fits on the top in the same way as the other one does. The magnets hold it in place nicely. You'd really have to shake that to get that to come apart, and then you get your 45-degree turns, which is really handy. And the final body unit to look at will be the missile one. So I'm going to take these off. Again, these have little magnets on them, so you can have them be on there and they're nice and sturdy, but then you can lift them off as the as you could have rules for it firing them during the mission, for example. Alternatively, it just makes it easy to pack them away. So they all come off nice and easy. There's two types. I don't remember what they are in terms of flavour and fluff, sorry, but there's this type with what looks like a more solid warhead, and there's this one with these tanks. I think it's supposed to be the Hellfire ones. So all of those come off. And again, it's the same base construction, except this time you'll see that the defensive parts are at the back with a raised area, and then the command tower on top with the radar. Same principle with the little details. This one's got these little coils to go at the back here. And these are mounts where there's a left and a right. So what I would do in terms of assembly order is to glue these onto the mounts first, so they only access in one way, and you have these little vents at the back to show you which one is the back. So the vents line up, there's vents there. If you assemble these into two components first, and then they plug on top of those little Lego stud type arrangements, and then that gives you your firing array, making sure to glue the little vent hole blocker, otherwise you'll have a hole down through the middle of the model, which will look a little weird. So put that in, then these go on. This one has the most detailed instruction on the designer's website, which really helps in terms of how to put this together. And the only other thing worth mentioning with these chassis is these little areas at the front do have little recesses for magnets there and there, because this is where the towing unit goes on. So again, the magnets would then hold it in place like that, because there's a recessed magnet there and there. I'm not going to bother, because I think honestly during a game it's mostly going to be flat on a table, so that's not necessary, but the option's there if you want, as is the same for the weapon mounts here. I have smaller magnets, and this little top plate actually has two magnet holes. That's because this can be detached. The top plate can come off, and there is a weapon system mount that can be put on here for a different vehicle type. This has the small tracks that go on the side, so when you're building this you get the hull, the rear attachment piece here, and the two tracks. The tracks are mirrored or are symmetrical, so it doesn't really matter if you put this track on this side or this side. It doesn't matter, there's no left and right track, they're just the same part. Just whichever way around fits. So once you put that together and these together, you've got your whole model like this. Again, magnetizable in certain areas if you want to have bits that come off. But overall, it's a pretty easy kit to assemble once you get the hang of how things go. And the key here is to dry fit everything first. Make sure you dry fit it so you don't then go and straight up glue it, because otherwise you'll end up gluing pieces in place that then you realize are in the way of others. So yeah, do them in layers, and then put on the attachment details afterwards. And if you are using magnets, magnetize the parts before you go, just so you can use a stack of magnets to check the polarity all the way along when you're building and avoid any issues. Otherwise you'll have certain missiles that will only go in certain places and it'll get a little messy. But yeah, they're not as daunting as they look. Obviously it's a massive chunk of resin. It's actually not too heavy to handle, which is good. And it's not too difficult to build, and just take it piece at a time and let your layers dry in between, and you'll be gold. If you do buy a kit and assemble it and run into any issues, obviously get in touch with me and I'll see if I'll be able to help you through them. But you know, I've built all three now and they were pretty easy going. They take about an hour or so to build each once you've cleaned up all the parts. The parts do come de-sprued, but you will have one or two tiny little sprue pieces like this that just require hobby knife removal. Obviously this was my demo one, so I didn't really have the time to clean up the parts in particular, but using a knife to take these off is super easy. Any rough patches or pieces that need to go together that don't fit perfectly, you can sand them. It comes with standard resin disclaimer of wear all the PPE on the world and clean your hobby area down afterwards and hoover it and wipe it and everything like that. You do not want to be breathing in resin dust, it's incredibly bad for your health. But other than that, have fun and have a bit of an adventure with a giant kit for some seriously cool looking, what is a ship? Naval ship sized weaponry on a vehicle, which is bonkers, but I love it.